welcome, welcome. It is our weekly book club episode here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my lovely co-host is...
I'm Megan. I don't know how lovely I am. I shared in our last episode because we record both on the same day. I've had a good cry today. My hair's in a messy ponytail, and I put a drink umbrella in my pink lemonade to make me feel a little bit better today. I'm having a rough day, but podcasting has been the highlight of my day. So we're going to have a good book club session. I'm excited. But yes, thank you, Amanda. I'm here. I made it.
We did. We made it. Yes. All right. So if you are new to our podcast and you're wondering how on earth this whole virtual book club setup works, we'll tell you.
Yes, exactly. So we read a variety of books about homeschooling, parenting, life, etc. We've got a great lineup coming up. I'm super excited. You are welcome to grab the books and read along with us, or you're welcome to just tune in and pick up the highs and lows from each book while you chop veggies or fold laundry or chauffeur the kids around town. And we've got a great lineup of books coming. So super excited about that.
Yes, for sure. The future looks bright. That said, we are wrapping up our current book, which is also good. A little bit different reasons, but good. Our current book selection is The Homeschooler's Guide to Portfolios and Transcripts. The earlier chapters contained tons of meat about portfolios, and now we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of transcripts. And then next week, we'll actually touch on college admissions stuff. So if that's something that you want to tune in for, stick with us. So yeah.
Love it. Yeah. So last week we had great plans. Amazing.
We did.
Always, right? We were going to cover chapters 6, 7, and 8, which we felt was really doable because chapter 6 was a lot about technology and it was largely outdated information. And so we were like, okay, we'll blow through 6, we'll do 7 and 8. We didn't get to 8, not even close. So today is a spillover episode that contains just chapter 8. So we'll see how long it is, but we're here to do chapter 8. We get there in the end. It's like homeschooling, right? You adjust the plan as you go. You ride the waves. You shift where you need to shift, and we are exemplifying that in book club. So to make sure we have enough time today, we are going to dive right in. It looks like you have our first note of the day, Amanda. What you got for us in chapter 8?
I do. So chapter 8 is titled Creating Your Transcript, and I think if you're reading just the sections that matter to you, you won't see as much repetition. But if you are reading straight through like we are, it definitely causes a lot of unintentional skimming, right? Like I had to keep catching myself and being like, oh, wait, this is not just for me. And so, I think that this book is useful because it's easy to be scared or afraid of things that you don't know about. And I would say the vast, vast majority of homeschooling parents or caregivers do not know how to create a transcript. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of creating a transcript or trying to get into college, it's like overwhelming. Like, oh, maybe I should go ahead and put them into some kind of school in high school to make sure I don't have to worry about that. So I do think there's value in at least following along with us and possibly reading the whole book. That said, I also think there's value in reading the sections that you need at the time that you need them and just briefly skimming the other things and looking at some of like the easy pull-out boxes and stuff like that, because she does tend to repeat herself quite a lot. It is pretty easy to just, read this chapter on this thing and this chapter on that thing and get what you need out of it. So you definitely, if you read it all now and you've only got a 6-year-old, when it actually matters, you'll be able to go in and just read chapter 7 or just read chapter 8 and you'll be fine.
Yeah. I was actually having a conversation with somebody on Facebook just today about this. It was a mom who posted she's brand new to homeschooling. She has a second grader and she was asking questions about transcripts. And there was a comment that somebody made that was like, you have years before you have to worry about a transcript. Like just enjoy having a little one at like a younger kid at home, like enjoy learning. And all these people were liking and hearting that and stuff like that. And listen, I'm the loosey-goosey, oh, let's just bake cookies and, whatever. But I also understand that there's a benefit to seeing the full and complete journey in front of you, because for me, if I don't know the details about something that's down the road, I will build that thing up in my head to be way worse and way scarier than it ever needs to be. And I will spend so much time and energy and angst on that thing that I've made so horrible, when in reality, if I had just taken a little bit of time to figure out what it was, I'd be like, oh, okay, we're going to enjoy homeschooling for now. Transcripts are yours down the road, but at least I know what to expect when I get there. Like I have an idea of it. Otherwise, it becomes like this boogeyman in my head and I get really worked up about it. So I completely understand. I mean, I kind of had this thought process when I was talking to this person today. It reminded me, like, imagine committing to homeschooling and not envisioning the whole thing out and not having an idea of what might come, right? It kind of reminded me in like the early 2000s when people would take out like a 10-year adjustable rate mortgage, and they'd be like, oh, look at this amazing house I got. I don't have to worry about what happens in 10 years. Yeah. And then in 10 years, the entire economy collapsed, because you didn't think beyond the 10 years. And so I'm like, I kind of had that same analogy. Like, even if you're years away from transcripts and portfolios, it doesn't hurt to at least have an idea of what the framework looks like. It'll be less intimidating and just give you a little bit more confidence, hopefully, in your earlier homeschool years.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so into the actual book on page 155 was my first comment. And it's one of those things, it's mentioned often, but I do like the list of ways to help you recognize how a kid learned a particular subject. So she kind of lists off a bunch of things, right? You can do it with direct instruction, independent study or research, books read, films viewed, performances attended, projects, exhibitions, etc., employment and internships, travel and day trips. And I have to say, some of them are obvious for me, and some of them are things that I would be like, I don't necessarily know, right? Because that's not our style of
Right.
homeschooling. But it was one of those things, like sometimes you just need someone to say it out loud and to
Uh-huh.
remind you that these are all ways to figure things out and evaluate things. So I appreciated that. But she does good lists, right? With her lists and her call out boxes and that kind of stuff. They're useful.
I like it. So we joke a lot about the fact that sometimes we make notes about things on the same page, but we're talking about completely different things on the same page. So I notice we both have notes for 157, 158, and 159. I haven't had a chance to look at, it doesn't look like they line up a tremendous amount. No, we took entirely different things from these pages, didn't I?
I mean, a bit, not entirely different, but on page 157, at the very top of the page, she has a 3-point breakdown of how to ask for written feedback. And I really liked that. I like that the list, the really clear, because I'm all about like, don't recreate the wheel,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have the wheel, you can improve on the wheel, but it's much easier for me to improve on the wheel if I have a wheel to start with. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Blueprint something. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. And so I liked this. She points out like ask several weeks before the end of class. And I thought that was a really great point because, they teach lots of kids. You're doing some kind of an online class, or even if it's an in-person class, just give them a heads up that you're going to want this so that they can be paying extra attention to, insightful comments or maybe how the kid interacts with other students in class or things like that so that you're getting a more useful written feedback from them. She also talks about like be really specific in what you want them to address. Don't just say like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
can you give a written feedback? And then when you get it, be like, well, this doesn't cover what I wanted, right?
Right.
Like tell them, like we really need some written feedback that addresses this thing and this thing, their critical thinking skills or their ability to, work with classmates and peers, whatever it is that you need this particular piece of feedback to provide you, like just be honest and upfront
Yeah.
about it. We all know how incredibly frustrating it is to be working with your spouse or anyone else that seems to think you can read their mind, right? They're like, didn't you know? Like, well, actually, no, I
No.
did not. I did not know that. Words would have been useful. Like, use your words.
That was my big takeaway from that page also because like my daughter had to get a letter of recommendation earlier this year for an internship that she just did last month, and she was the youngest intern applying because you had to be a college student, and she's 15 and in college, so I could almost guarantee that no other 15-year-old was applying for this thing, right? And so she needed a letter from the dean of the college that she goes to, and the dean said, we through conversation, is there anything there? And we were talking about it, my daughter and I said she should probably put something that overcomes your age, right? That says like, despite her age, Astrid is always on time for class, always submits assignments on time, whatever. And she did. She included that. And I think put like, often sets the benchmark for quality of work in class, or, often scores the highest, even, among peers that are a decade older than her or something. And it's like, so if you think you have an idea of what the objection might be or something like that too, like you can diminish it a little bit by overcoming it in that letter. Now, I will say I had to write, not had to, it was like I love it when I get asked to write, because I don't get asked a whole bunch, right? Like I teach, one of the huge subjects that I teach is confectionery arts. Like that's not typically the person that you're going to be like, can I get a letter of recommendation? But I had a student who's so amazing and so talented, and I just adore him to pieces. And he was applying for programs that were like hotel and restaurant management and stuff, ultimately to go to like confectionery school, like in France eventually or something. That was his goal. And he's so amazing. So my feedback was actually beneficial to the program that he was going into, because it was applicable. And I had said to him, now this is how old I am, right? I said, okay, like if you want to give me the names, he had told me the 3 schools that he was applying for, which were like out of this world schools. I'm like so happy for him. But I said, like, if you want to give me the names of the programs, so I can say like, he would be a tremendous asset to the blah, blah program at such and such a university. Like I'll personalize it and send you 3 different, or, or I can leave it blank and you can fill it in whatever you want me to do. It's like this online website now where you upload your letters of recommendation. They're totally generic. You can't personalize them at all. And I was like, that just took like, for me, I'm like, that's how you make it. That's how you take it from like good to amazing, And he was like,
oh,
nope,
this is
not
like
an
the
option.
standard. Yeah, now you can't anymore. Like
you just upload it one time. And then when he applies and says like, here are my, they go and like pull it off that site. And so it's like a depository basically. So I was like, well, that's boring. But yeah, generally speaking, I agree. Like get as specific as possible, let them know like the program, is all about this skill, that skill, or the other skill. So if you feel I exemplify those skills or that I'm strong in those skills, could you find a way to call that out? Like, yes, 100%, because tons of them are going to be super generic and yours will stand out. All about it. All right. Or both of us had a note on the next page. So
next 2 pages, but we have we took pretty different things from both of the next 2 pages. So 158, you start, because I've looked at the 2. So I think it's better for you to start, and then I'll get like my nitty gritty.
Because yours will be way more detailed. Okay. So unlike Amanda, right? So I live in low regulation states. I've homeschooled in 4 states. They're all super low regulation. So very different experience than what Amanda has, or if you live like in New England or, New York, Pennsylvania, you're writing down a lot of stuff. I was required to write down basically nothing. And so I will tell you that I wrote down basically nothing. Okay. So then it came time to do a transcript, and I was like, starting with a blank piece of paper, right? So she talks about things that you can pull from in order to build the transcript. And she had some good ones here. She had like highlights in books, internet bookmarks, boxes of materials, mind maps, which we talked about in last week's episode or the week before. I had none of that, because we weren't learning that way anyway. So in Florida, we were required to keep materials for 2 years, but I haven't homeschooled in Florida for like a really long time. So those boxes I just threw away at one point when we moved. I was like, these are done. So I used, what I found super helpful was my Facebook feed, because anytime we did anything super interesting or super fun, usually I would snap a photo, not because I want to tell the world, like, look at how amazing my children are and look at how awesome our homeschool is. I mainly post up to Facebook that I want to see in 5 years, and be like, look at how little they were or whatever, We were in France one time and my kid found a Baby Bell cheese that was like the size of his head. And I was like, I'm putting that on Facebook, just because in years to come, like we look at it to this day, we're like, oh my gosh, remember that giant Baby Bell cheese? Right?
Yeah.
So that was a great source for me. We use OutSchool a ton. We have since 2017. So OutSchool, you can break out your transcripts per learner. So I can go in there and filter by the kiddo who I'm working on something for, and it'll show me everything back to 2017 that they've taken on OutSchool. Let me tell you, there was so much stuff I had forgotten, which makes sense since I wrote nothing down. Yes, I know I'm like giving you, are you like having panic attack over there? Like palpitations, Amanda, thinking about homeschooling this way?
It's okay. Different strokes for different folks. It's okay.
Okay, I got this. Right?
I'm just going to put some tequila in my tea so that this is not so stressful. I'll be right back.
I I'll send you a virtual drink umbrella for your cup of tea, since I'm doing a drink umbrella today. I used my calendar for like field trips that we went on and stuff. I just scrolled back through my calendar for like forever. And then I publish, quote unquote, every year for my kids at the end of the year, a family yearbook for that year, which I've talked about in other episodes. It's like travel, everyday fun, holidays, whatever, accomplishments, stuff like that. And so I literally just grabbed them all off the shelf. They're huge. And flipped through for ages and, oh, I forgot about that. I forgot about that. I forgot about that. Right. And wrote down all this stuff and then was able to categorize them, which I'll talk more about when we get to the next page, page 159. But before I do that, you had a thought on 158, Amanda.
Yeah, so she just had made a point to better understand what your kiddo knows and how they learned it. Ask, how do you know about blah, blah, blah? And I really like this, right? My kiddo knows so much about things that I know nothing about or very, very little about. And I didn't teach him those things, right? He's young enough. I may have secured the book from the library, or, he may have said, hey, I want to read this. Can you check and see if it's okay for me to read, and I downloaded it onto his Kindle, or I did a little bit of research and told him he could watch a documentary, but I was like, it's another history documentary. You can't make me watch it. And so I just really liked this piece of advice. And I thought that it was a great thing for us to do better at implementing in our home when he's talking about something. And I'm like, I don't know anything about that. Instead of just being like, what? Or, oh, okay. To go that next step and be like, well, that's really interesting. How did you learn about that? How do you know more about Winston Churchill than they presented in the Winston Churchill Museum?
That's so fantastic. Oh my gosh, I love it. Yeah, that is awesome. So on 159, I had made a section here. So there's a section here about categorizing who I am and what I've done and all that kind of stuff. And I just made a note, so I just talked about all the ways that I pulled data, right, and pulled historical information. And for me, kind of what this process is that she has here, for me, that looks like a big piece of poster board, because again, I'm old. And, right, I think this is like poster board. The poster board trick is like a north of 40 thing, I feel like, right? Like anybody else is like, oh, I used a digital whiteboard. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
There's that, there's some management thing, right? So I sell paper pie books on the super side. Mostly I use it for discounts for ourselves because I love them. But if you're looking to buy them from someone, let me know. I'm happy to send you my link. But there's in my team, right, for whatever, they're always like, we use this management thing and you can download the script and you can put all of these things. And it is some kind of a virtual digital poster board with sticky note things. I'm like I don't understand how this works. I don't remember. It's not that. It's got some other name, and someone listening absolutely knows because they've been stuck using it. But I'm just like, get this away from, I want nothing to do with this. I do not understand it. I do not want your virtual sticky notes. I love a Post-it note. Okay.
Yes.
I have tons of Post-it notes at home. I do not want your virtual Post-it note. I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I'm like, there's something very tactile. I need it and I need to take it off and stick it there. And then I need to pick it up and stick it somewhere else. And that's what they were invented for. So yeah, mine was, I literally kind of created, I took all the things that I had written down from my OutSchool transcript and Facebook memories and all that kind of stuff. And I made a sticky note for each one. And then I kind of clumped them on a big piece of poster board. And then I would be like, okay, and a lot of what we do is multidisciplinary. So I would look at something and I'd be like, oh, this has science and coding and, math and all this stuff in there, right? And so then I'd look and I'd be like, oh, he has a ridiculous amount of science, he's super science heavy. So instead of slotting this under science, I'm going to pick up my sticky note, because that's what you can do when you do it the old fashioned way, and plunk it down into math instead. And so I was able to kind of shuffle all of those activities and kind of divide and conquer the multidisciplinary ones to give it credit in multiple places where it needed to be. And so that was super helpful for me when I was working through that process. And then the other thing that I put on 159, which I loved because I feel like a little bit of a salmon swimming upstream sometimes in the homeschool world, where it's like, okay, so it's really cool that your kid likes I don't know, pogo sticking or something. Like, that's adorable. But we did our schoolwork and then we did pogo sticking. And I'm like, well, why isn't, pogo sticking part? Like, there's a huge amount of physics involved and stuff like that, like figure out and set up challenges and like all that kind of stuff, right? So it's the thing here that says nothing should be considered as trivial, meaningless, or done just for fun. Because the reality is the things that we do, even as adults, just for fun, typically are the most enriching experiences that we have and involve the deepest learning that sticks with us for so long because it was done, quote unquote, just for fun. So I loved that she called that out, because sometimes the stuff they come up with is really the richest, which is pretty awesome.
But also, this is a perfect example of how we took two totally different things from the same story, right? So I agree with you. And that idea of like, there's lots to learn from even the fun stuff, right? For me, it comes from this story. She's telling a story about how a school principal wanted to know what her kiddo had learned by laying his ear to the ground and listening for sounds during a unit they did on Native Americans. And she felt that her 6-year-old was smart enough to eventually figure out sometime in the future that, how sound traveled through solid objects versus air, and that she didn't need to explicitly tell him. Like, that wasn't the point of this exercise at 6. And the school principal like wanted her to have done this at 6. And she was like, no, I'm not teaching him that. Like, he'll figure it out on his own at some point down the road. And for me, I find that kind of crap really frustrating.
Yeah. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. And that thing of like, we come up against this all the time in elementary classes. Like, they'll just expose kids, like we were saying with the science in our last episode, like, okay, we're going to do this experiment and it turned blue and now we're going to move on. Wasn't that fun? And it's like, oh, well, we don't want to overwhelm them, like, oh, it might, okay, just share the info, right? And the kid that wants that info will file that away and be like, oh, I want to learn more about that. Or, oh, that's an interesting fact. I want to keep that fact. And the kid who doesn't care, they won't, they won't file it away and they'll be like, walk, walk, walk. It'll sound like the Peanuts teacher or whatever. And that's fine, but like, we don't have to treat all kids like they're incapable of understanding, like, interesting, detailed, ideas and thoughts. And this idea that like, well, we won't explain that to you until you're the age that we think you should know it. I hate that, like, give them all the information, obviously in an age appropriate way, but give them the information and let them ask questions or let them not care, but make it their decision, their choice.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of that. And it's funny because, when it comes, when I teach online and stuff like that, I mainly teach middle schoolers and high schoolers. And part of my disconnect with teaching younger kids is that I never treated my kids like they were the age that they were. And so I don't know what other people consider age appropriate for younger learners like that. And so somebody was saying the other day, their kids found Liberty Kids online and they loved it. Like, what other kind of historical shows that are mostly accurate, as close as you're going to get for TV and stuff. And I brought up Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Were you a Dr. Quinn fan, Amanda? It was on Friday nights during our youth. Friday night, 8:00, CBS, like, be in front of the television, right? And I brought that up, and this other mom, and listen, however you want to expose your stuff to your kids, they're your kids, go for it. But this other mom was like saying to the mom who asked the question, like, oh, like, there's some like really heavy stuff in that show. Like, I'd be careful. It was on in our youth on Fridays at 8:00. It was meant for family programming, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, hey, and there were a couple of touchy episodes that were like a little bit more, I mean, she's a pioneer doctor in the 1800s who goes out to Colorado, and it's, during the blatant genocide of the Cheyenne people who lived in that area. That was their ancestral home. And it was done in an age appropriate way, but there was some heavy content.
Covered. Yeah.
Yeah. There were going to be a lot of conversations to be had. And I'm like, my youngest was like 4 when we watched that, because the older kids were ready to watch it. He always just got lumped in with everything else, And so I never treated them like they were little. If there was a movie that we wanted to watch where there was like one scene that wasn't maybe up to my censorship level at that point, it would be like, I'd either skip through it or we'd earmuff or, whatever. But yeah, I I'm a huge fan of not treating little kids like little kids. They can tolerate so much more than we give them. They're hungry for information. They can take it. If they have questions, they'll ask questions. Like, give them the information. I mean, why wouldn't you? Why are we gatekeeping information? You know?
Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
right, like I don't, and it's that thing, I mean, again, like I said, I understand, age appropriate, and I do get to an extent that varies. On the flip side of it, we might have talked about this in a previous episode. I was recently talking with my mom about how I remember sitting on the floor in front of the bookshelf reading the encyclopedias as a young child, right? Because we lived in a really rural area. We had a very small library. We didn't have great informational books. We didn't have cable, but we had a regular encyclopedia, and then we had a set of science encyclopedias. And, I mean, it was just facts. It was information. Yeah. And was it all written for the first or second grader that was sitting there reading it? Probably not necessarily, but at the same time, it was just facts and information. And there's nothing wrong with allowing a kid to read through those things and being available to answer questions or to say, you know what, that is a really interesting question, but I'm not quite sure this is the time for us to talk about it.
Right.
Let's see if we can find a book that goes into it in a little bit more age appropriate way. Or I don't know how to talk about this in the most age appropriate way. So I need to do a little bit of research and see if I can find some resources to help us have a more in-depth conversation about this. That is okay.
Yeah.
From both a homeschooling perspective and a parenting perspective, right?
Or like when my kid asked me on a public bus about sex when he was like 7. And I said, I'm not sure that's a public bus conversation, but we can talk about it when we get off the bus, right? And
No.
we did. He got the full gamut, So.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah, it's okay. I love it. All right. Well, before we continue with our book discussion, I want to do just a quick interjection, and this will probably be the only episode that we talk about this because the voting window is really, really short. But Amanda and I have applied to be a panel participant at the 2025 South by Southwest Educator Forum. We will link our proposal in the comments or in the description for this podcast, wherever you're listening to it. And there's 3 phases to be selected. The first phase is just public voting, just sheer number of votes. So if you are listening, by the time this episode launches, there will only be like 4 or 5 days left. So if you could, please head over. You have to create an account. I'm sorry, you have to create an account, but it's South by Southwest. It's a reputable company. You can use your junky email address that you use for like sale ads and stuff like that. Okay. You hit a little up arrow to say, yes, we love them. And then at the bottom, there's a place for you to put a comment about why you think that's important. I will say we went to a kind of a presentation about how to present and how to propose an idea. And the whole thing was traditionally education focused, the whole thing, to the point that I finally typed into the Zoom Q&A, like, are homeschoolers welcome or included? Like, how do you see us participating? And they answered the question. They were like, oh yeah, that's something we're like really looking to explore more about. So I was like, okay, great. They need some homeschoolers in their lives. So please give us a vote. We'll do our best to represent you proudly, but it would be super awesome if we got to go. And so when you go to that link, you'll be able to see our proposal video that tells you what our proposal is about. So you know what you're voting for. But yes, we would be ever so grateful for the vote. So thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually went and looked just more generally, right, poking around the site, and there are over 1,400 proposals, and 7 of them have something in one way or another to do with homeschooling. So 7 out of 1,400 plus.
It's so bananas.
Proposals. It is.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. And the thing is our idea, it's mostly teachers, right? Teachers and professors of education and that kind of thing, this particular group. And what we would really love to do is present what we do from 2 very different perspectives, and then just really put ourselves out there and give these teachers the opportunity to, like, in some ways, just really hammer us about what homeschooling is, and, whether or not it's valuable, whether or not we're giving the personalized education that kids need and really thrive with, like, ask us the hard questions. We'll do the best we can to answer them and just help kind of grow awareness so that there's less stigma around it and more understanding, and not this, in some ways, the like doom and gloom that you get with like really conservative Christian stuff, right? Like hell and damnation for pulling your kid out of public school. Like let's change the narrative some.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I mean, we were just talking about it's information, right? Having access to information opens doors, changes minds. So that's our goal, right? Is to show up and share some information, some own voice perspective on homeschool experience, right? So yes, please give us a vote. We would so appreciate it. All right, so back to book club. So let's see. Okay, now in last week's episode, we had planned to cover chapter 6, 7, and 8. Oops. On page 138 in chapter 7, I had taken note of how transcript hours are calculated. And I said I wanted to put a pin in what was mentioned on chapter 7, page 138 there, so that we could come back to it in chapter 8. So basically, as a recap, since now this is a separate episode, it talks about Carnegie units being 120 hours of classroom seat time, calculated as one 45-minute period per 180 days of school year. And that is how you get a 1 credit on a transcript. That is kind of the standard measurement, right? Now, if we jump into chapter 8, where we really are, she's talking about kind of all these organic learning experiences that her kids have had and all this kind of stuff, right? And so specifically, she gives an example about oceanography and her kid going to like Penny Camp Coral Reef in Key Largo, Florida. She talks about this whole experience, right? In Key Largo and Penny Camp Coral Reef and this, that, and the other thing. My question is, do you think as homeschoolers that we need to stick to that 120 hours of work, blah, 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 to assign a Carnegie unit? Because I feel like in so many other ways, we offset time for homeschooling based upon the richness of the learning experience, the personalization of the learning experience, and the oftentimes one-on-one connection in the learning experience. So, for example, we talk about the fact that school is like 6 hours a day, right? But, they might, in a 40-minute block of math, they might only really be doing like 5 minutes of math or something, because by the time the teacher explains something and then there's disruptions and questions and people are walking around and sharpening pencils and like all this kind of stuff, right? So that 40 minutes isn't really 40 minutes. But if you sit down with your kid and you cover 10 minutes of math, it is 10 immersive, concentrated, personalized, solid minutes of math. So it kind of made me wonder, like, do you feel that we are beholden to that same set of standards? There's something else on page 166 that talks about the same thing. And it says, finally, remember that we all have gaps in our learning. School students do too. Most of them haven't studied astronomy by stargazing or done yoga or physical education or experienced Shakespeare's plays in the way he intended in performance. So is seeing a Shakespeare play and, reading about him and having, discussion afterwards and all of that, is there an offset? Is there a curve in time, do you think?
I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. I guess for me personally, the way that I think I would approach it, and now I'm years away from actually having to work on a transcript, so who knows if I'll still be in this same place, but I think that for things like attending a performance or reading the book, that counts, for the amount of time it was. Because for me, that's, not really any different than the field trip day or, the school taking that. So if the performance was an hour and a half, it's an hour and a half of instruction time. But I hadn't thought about it before, but I do agree that direct instruction time with your kid, or, that one-on-one teaching and exploration where you're talking about things, working on things and exploring things, it is a more concentrated amount of learning and time. So I can see where, like that could, I think that would count for like at least double compared to, group instruction, like you say, with the interruptions and the questions and the, this and that. But that's it. It's really, I think it's hard, right, to to compare an in-classroom amount of time and how much time you're supposed to put into something to an at-home amount of time, right? It's easy if they're doing an online class where they're sitting through a lecture and there's all the breaks and the hemming and the hawing and they're not paying that much attention and, and whatever, and the stupid questions. No, there's no stupid question. There are stupid questions.
There's totally stupid questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I ask stupid questions myself sometimes. I usually preface them with, I think this is a really dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, but there totally are.
I realize this is dumb and I should be able to figure it out, but it's not. I'm not. So can you just help me get there? So yeah, I do think, but it's tricky, right? Because figuring out where that line is and which experiences get to count for, kind of double the amount of time because of how rich it is. That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking while you were talking, like I played tennis when I was younger and in school and stuff like that, right? And so I would be at group practices or, take group lessons or drills or whatever, right? And let's say there'd be like 4 kids on the court. And so you'd line up, you'd get to the front, you'd hit your 3 volleys, you'd go to the back of the line. The other 3 kids would go, you'd do the same thing, right? And so you're learning, right? But there's that time in between. And sometimes, like, let's say, Susie's in front of me and she does her volleys and the coach stops and goes, okay, do you see what Susie is doing here? And he's giving instruction to all of us based upon Susie's experience, but I'm not hitting all those balls. And then, I would take private lessons sometimes too, if I was like working on something specific or whatever. And, you'd be exhausted after a private lesson because you're never standing around. You are on for that full hour and you are like grinding that entire time. And so I'm thinking about it and I'm like, it's kind of the same concept, right? Like, that same thing. So I hadn't really thought of that until I read this book. And then I was like, well, hold on a second. Like, yeah, I kind of feel like that does exist. But yeah, to your point, and then there's an ethics behind it too, right? Where it's like, well, if the standard is a Carnegie unit and that's what everybody perceives that to be, and you're like, oh, well, we didn't actually do the 120 hours, but ours is just so much better that our 70 equals your 120. Like, is there a breach of ethics there when you're putting together a transcript, right? There's a lot of fuzziness, but I do feel like there's something to be said for that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious if there is already something kind of figured out for one-on-one tutoring versus an in-person class, like a group class setting and how the Carnegie units are calculated. That'd be an interesting, I'm going to go research that.
Please do. Report back to us next week, please.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, as per usual, we both have notes for page 163, but yours is much longer. So I'm just going to get mine out of the way so Amanda and I both put our notes in the thing and mine will literally say like, I like this. And then Amanda has like a paragraph. So I'm like, she's definitely more clear in her thoughts in our notes page than I am. There was a point on 163 that I really liked where she's talking about creating the transcript. And she said, go to your high school's website and get a list of the classes that they offer, mainly so that you can understand the way they structure a class and the way they title the classes and the way they write the descriptions for the classes, so that when you write your transcript, you're kind of speaking the same language. And I wouldn't have thought to do that, mainly because I don't give a lick what's happening in public school. But I did think it was solid advice for somebody who does, or somebody who's in like a very competitive application market or something like that. That's pretty solid advice, I thought.
And so that's it. My comment was 2-part on this page. So on 163, right, the first thing that I pulled out was she's got a box that says, who creates curriculum? Human beings. And it was, for me, that's one of those things. Like, it should be obvious, but it definitely took me back just a moment. And it made me think, like, that is so true. We hold up curriculum as like this, well, you can use this curriculum for first grade. You can use this curriculum. And I'm hearing it a lot this week in this conference I'm attending, right? You can use this core curriculum as, your entire spine for 4th grade. But someone, and in fairness, a lot of times a group of someone's created this curriculum. But that also means that you can create your own curriculum. People sometimes feel like if they're doing unit studies or they're doing interest-based learning, it's just interest based learning, or it's just a unit study, but you can put that together and flesh it out and make it a full curriculum, and it can count as a full curriculum because you can put these pieces together and create a curriculum just like other human beings create curriculums. And
exactly.
so for me, that, yeah, you know, it was like, I think we don't think about that perspective of it. There's often a disconnect.
Well, and I think there's been so much messaging to us over time that because we are not teachers, for example, we are not qualified to homeschool our kids, right? And so to the point that a lot of times people will ask you that, well, are you going to like take a class on teaching or something? No, I'm qualified to teach my own children. And so I think it kind of comes to the same thing with curriculum, right? Like, well, clearly professionals are the only people that can do that. You must have to have some sort of special criteria to do that. But the reality is no one can customize anything for your child the way you can customize something for your child. So you are qualified. Go for it.
Yeah.
Go forth the curriculum build.
You know, we don't even trust teachers to create curriculum for kids. You know, I mean, for the most part, teachers in any sort of classroom, brick and mortar or virtual, they have to follow a curriculum handed to them by someone else. And the vast majority of the time that you see news articles about someone getting all bent out of shape about what a teacher is doing, it's because they tried to expand on the curriculum, right? They looked at it, they were like, it's missing this thing, or it's missing this perspective, or we can go deeper on this based on the demographic of this class, you know?
Right.
And people are like, no, you don't get to make that decision. You're a person, and the curriculum was made by not persons. I don't, you know, like,
yeah. People who don't teach in classrooms, that's who makes it, you know, and they clearly know better than you do.
Okay, so they're so in touch.
Yeah.
All right. So the other thing, I just lost my bookmark. I'll have to try to make sure I don't lose. So the other thing that I got off of this page, and it's pretty much exactly what you were saying, right? The quote says, for the time being, do not limit your definition of learning to what you think should go on your final transcript. Before you get down to the brass tacks of writing your curriculum, acquire a copy of a high school course selection handbook. She goes on to say they are available from your state Department of Education, your superintendent's office, or high school guidance department. And I agree with Meagan. I think it's that thing, even if you don't care at all about what they're doing in public schools, request ones from a few different schools around you, maybe a performing arts school and, you know, something else, and look at them, because you do not have to recreate the wheel. For me, this is one of those examples. I almost guarantee you could read through there and earmark a few different ones and be like, we did something fairly close to this.
Right.
You know, I could tweak this just a little, you know, I can tweak this one just a little. Oh yeah, we did, you know, like, you don't have to recreate the wheel. And so, yeah, I agree. This was really solid advice, even if you're not doing things that are super closely aligned with what your actual school is doing.
Well, and the reality is the teacher in the individual classroom, as much to your point about like people get their panties in a twist when they try to personalize things, it wasn't doled out in the classroom the exact same way as it's written on the piece of paper too. So you always, for me, I think you always have to go back to that, like, oh, is it okay? Like ours wasn't exactly like that. So is it okay if I use that class title and this and that? Theirs wasn't exactly like that either. You're just holding yourself accountable to the same standard that they are. So it's okay. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Totally.
No, that's so true. Right. Like most of the time it has been distilled down to mean almost nothing, which is a huge part of why, like, it'll be interesting when we move on to the college application process of this book, right? Because the little snippet, the 1 or 2 lines about what the class was, like, doesn't actually tell you anything about what was done over an entire semester, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
The struggle is real across the board.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So I have the next comment as well. And this is just more of a general comment. So on page 169, the section is called Organizing Your Transcript. And she's talking about different ways to do it. And some of the ways she brings up are by grade. So, you know, in 9th grade, they completed this, in 10th grade, they completed that. or a more cumulative showing subject progression. So, instead of by 9th, 10th, 12th, it might be math and showing how they worked through it, or history and showing how it kind of like built on each other. Or she said, even one of that kind of caught my mind was the focusing on interdisciplinary headings, much more along the lines of what you might see in college kind of courses, and using that in your high school transcript. And for me, it was just one of those things. I would definitely have to revisit that and really think about how I was going to do it when I was actually sitting down to do a transcript. But I think it's one of those good kind of like mind opening things of, oh yeah, like those are some interesting ideas. And there are good examples in the back of the book, which we'll cover soon. But yeah, I think that there's one of the biggest struggles with transcripts, right, is that we actively choose not to teach in the same way that brick and mortar schools teach. And then at the end of the day, we're supposed to provide a written documentation of how we learned, and it's supposed to be in the same way that brick and mortar schools teach. And it's hard to reconcile that, and looking at the different options, and then also being realistic about how well that's going to go over depending on your audience or what you're using it for. I just thought that was interesting.
I wonder, I've never gone to look at them, but now I want to. So when I lived in Florida, we had some pretty impressive charter high school programs that existed that were like culinary programs or vet tech or something like that. And it makes me wonder what their transcripts look like coming out of those programs. Like where is the scale balanced, first of all, as far as like core standard work and then the specialty stuff mixed in? And then how does that reflect on their transcript? And then the other thought that I have is, like, when we lived in Texas, my now 16-year-old did his freshman year at a private Montessori high school, which technically he should have been an 8th grader by age, but socially, intellectually, etc., he fit into high school, so he got put in there. And so he did that, and I'd be very curious to see what a transcript looks like from there. We ended up moving. He would have stayed there. He loved it. It was as hippie as it gets and super child-led, and they didn't have desks or classrooms or anything. Like, it was really, they had a huge maker space. It was like heaven for him. He loved it. But we ended up, my husband got transferred and we moved, and I'd probably be eating cat food by now if he continued to go there because it was ridiculously expensive. But I wonder what their transcripts would have looked like, right? So it's like we're thinking about public school kids, and they're all going to have relatively similar experiences, but there are quirky high schools that are out there that are doing kind of wacky stuff, for lack of a better term. And so I wonder how they're probably doing the same thing homeschoolers are, right? Where they're kind of having to speak the language of other people in order to communicate the experience.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it makes me wonder, what are schools and universities, seeing these days? Are they seeing more, of these like cumulative summary type transcripts that show progression in topics and subjects, because there is more independent study these days, and there is more of this kind of alternative option even in regular brick and mortar schools? You're seeing more of those things out there, or is that really reserved for the Browns of the world, and they get that and they're okay with it, and the others still just really want to see what you did in 9th grade, and so they can easily say, yep, they did 4 years of math, and they did 4 years of ELA, and they did their 2 years of foreign language, and so
check.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I looked at Brown after our whole exploration of that when we were reading Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney to see what the entry requirements were for Brown. And there's still a lot of schools after the pandemic have either minimized or done away with their SAT requirement. And Brown is still heavily relying on the SAT according to the internet. And so it's so interesting to me that you have this Ivy League school that's super interest led and create your own roadmap and stuff like that. But yet the criteria to get in is as textbook as it gets, right? It was like,
Mhm.
oh, that doesn't seem to align with the overall philosophy. I was a little bit surprised about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Well, the last note that we have between us for the week is on page 172. And this is one of those, it seems obvious, but somebody has to say it sometimes. And it's just talking about the style of the transcript, right? As far as, the way that you choose to abbreviate things, whether you choose to number things or bullet things, being consistent in your styling and things like that, making sure that it fits the content that you're presenting, the audience that it's intended for, making sure that if you start by underlining your subheadings, that you continue to underline your subheadings, right? Consistency, things like that. It's all really obvious stuff. But as I put in my notes, like the day before we were intended to record this originally, I had gone to the airport to pick up my daughter's best friend. And I would think I told Amanda there was a sign at security. I had to go through TSA because I had to sign for him. So I had a gate pass, right? And I had to go through TSA. And there was a thing at the conveyor belt for security reminding people not to put their babies and toddlers into the little plastic bins at airport security and slide them through the machine. And so I feel like as much as sometimes things are obvious, those signs exist for a reason, right? Like somebody, maybe more than one person, has tried to put their baby through the machine at the airport. And so sometimes having those just obvious notations, it's just something else to examine when you're doing your transcript, right? That consistency and that visual piece, making sure that everything is I's dotted, T's crossed, the end, and it looks good.
Yeah. Saying the signs, they have to be there for a reason. There's a thing going around on it's Instagram right now that's like life hacks that aren't life hacks at all. And there's this one guy that I follow that I find especially funny where he's making fun of the life hack videos. And one of them that he does is he puts the toothpaste like directly on his teeth. And then he like starts brushing his teeth, or like he's got one where he puts this like sugar in his coffee and then he has the spoon, but then instead of stirring the spoon, he stirs the cup and the spoon at the same time, like life hack, and the coffee's gone everywhere, and just that like it's so true.
It's like those 5-minute craft videos. They've gotten so out of control. It's just like, oh my gosh. I think people watch them for the stupidity now more than anything, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I can completely see that. That's fabulous. So yeah, those signs exist for a reason, right? People are trying this stuff. You never know.
Right. This is not a life hack. Do not put the baby through the X-ray machine. All right. Well, so that wraps up our book club for the day. Next week, we'll be discussing chapters 9 and 10. We're a little behind schedule, but we're getting back there. Hopefully, we'll be able to cover both 9 and 10 next week, and we'll be good to go. Yes, exactly. Those chapters transition into discussion about college applications and college admissions, so that should be interesting. Even if you're homeschooling littles, stick with us. The future is far less daunting when you have a solid visual of the road ahead of you, right? We talked about that earlier. I know for me personally, I'm that planner. I see people in homeschool groups all the time who have all these questions, and then they say like they have a 2-year-old or, that kind of thing. If you're a planner, this is a great opportunity to just, get some information, start the building blocks, build the foundation of what you're going to have to do down the road.
Yeah. I mean, you're a planner, so you find that helpful. I'm an anxious wreck, and I find that helpful. So whatever the source of your motivation is, it's helpful to know what's ahead of you.
Yeah. No, totally. And it doesn't matter. One is not better than the other, right? We talked about that just in last week's episode. Different is not better or worse, just different. So for whatever reason, stick with us. Really, we think it'll be beneficial. And before we sign off, one last thing, we'd like to extend an invitation to join our Facebook group. So if you're on Facebook, you can search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, and then a couple things will pop up, but you can then filter further for groups, and you'll find our private group. We chat homeschooling. The community is always ready to offer support, whether that's you're doing an okay job even though it doesn't feel like it, or suggestions on X, Y, or Z. But we also like to have fun. We talk books and other random fun things, and what have you got going on, and what are you doing for this back to school and that kind of stuff. So we'd love to welcome you in there as long as you're kind. If you're not kind, don't come. Don't look for us.
Exactly. Yeah. Stay in your corner. We're good. So, thank you for joining us for today's episode. Tune in next week. We'll be continuing our discussion. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.